Okie dokie. We are here on Tuesday, July 18th with me and Thaddeus and Seva Simran today, our new friend. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, guys.
So we're so glad you're here. And we also have our AI friend. What's his name? Fathom. We'll call him Fathom. So today we're going to talk about the evolution from chemical and like chemical dependence and drug use and that kind of stuff to our evolved spiritual space that we can get to. And we have a really cool story here. So I wanted to give you, Seva, space to tell your story, because you have been doing this for 2 decades now as a Kundalini yoga practitioner, teacher, all the things. But that's not where you started. So that's your setup, and go.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey. And I think that the last, 15 years have gone by really fast, you know? Yeah. Let's see, I got into Kundalini yoga in 2004. And at that time I was about 2.5 or 3 years into sobriety. I got sober a little bit young at 19 in 2001. So this was, just after high school. I think, at first, me and my friends, I guess we got started kind of young, smoking weed around 13 years old, stealing our parents' cigarettes at 12 and all of that. But my dad, my father, and my grandfather both were pretty serious alcoholics, and it ended up killing both of them. So that's in my blood, that's in my genetics for sure. How far back it goes, I don't know, but at least those two for sure, guaranteed those two. And so going in high school, everyone's partying and everything, and that was the modeling also that I had. I ended up, becoming leaning on chemicals to deal with my emotions and pain and discomforts, like so many people.
Yeah.
But I mostly because I didn't have the tools to deal with my feelings. Looking back on it, that's what I was really lacking. And also just this communication skills that were really lacking to talk about things. So I ended up getting into, smoking weed, and mushrooms were always my favorite thing. I actually really had a lot of fun with those. And growing up in Topanga Canyon, we just had like a bunch of trees around. You go take a walk and do some mushrooms. It was great. And then at some point it evolved into, pills and powders, and definitely when I was around 17, got addicted to meth and then coke. And then that turned into smoking rock.
Yeah.
And that lasted, until I was 19 and a half. So May 9th, 2001, I ended up getting sober. And then, a couple of years later, when sobriety got kind of rocky, when things were getting real, and I needed new tools, I, serendipitously got introduced to Kundalini yoga. And that reignited an inspiration. It really inspired me and gave me something to do while I was sober, rather than just being sober. It gave me like some activity in life.
Sure, something to focus on. How did you go from zero to Kundalini yoga? Was there a person that showed up, or like what was the catalyst there?
Yeah, so at that time I was having a really tough time. I was trying to take a calculus class, and it wasn't fitting inside my brain. Like I always wanted to be a veterinarian, so I was doing like that school work to be a vet, or pre-veterinary, whatever it was. And couldn't do this calculus class. And at that time, I was going to AA meetings for my whole sobriety. At that time, like did a lot of young people and Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. And which was great because the community was a lot of fun, just a bunch of young people being sober,
Drinking a lot of coffee.
drinking caffeine, and lots of cigarettes. So
Yep, cigarettes.
fantastic community. Definitely was a good platform for sobriety.
Mm.
But yeah, I was just kind of hit a wall. I hit a big wall, and totally I just wanted to smoke weed, and that led me to get back into meetings. And then right around that time, my sister, who had gotten into Kundalini and was doing the Kundalini training in Los Angeles with this lady, Krishnakar, she was like, hey, my sister was like, hey, come check out this meditation. I think you really like it. And I was like, okay, I don't know, like whatever. So she taught me one Kundalini class, which she had to do for her teacher training anyway. It was like her practice class. And she showed me some stretches, and I could not sit in easy pose, cross-legged for 3 minutes without being in intense pain. Like, it was so tight in the hips and back. So she taught me a class, showed me some stretches, and said, okay, we're going to go to this meditation. She picks me up at 4 a.m. to go to morning practice, morning sadhana with her teacher training group. It was the worst experience of my life, I'm pretty sure. Worst.
Totally.
Worst.
But you did it. Look where you are.
It's so inspirational. I found it through the worst experience of my life. It was so bad I went back.
But that's how the day started. Like, I still remember that it was excruciating. And then so we do this meditation. Everybody's wearing white. I had to wear like a cut up t-shirt on my head because everybody covers their head. I had like some white sweatpants and a white undershirt. Like, that's what I had.
Yep.
And we did the meditation. It was hard. It was difficult. And then, but at the end of the day, I just remember being so high. I was like, man, that whole time I was fucking around with drugs. This was the feeling I was looking for. I remember having that feeling like this was it. So just like that energetic, the openness, the flow, the self-connection, the mental clarity, the energetic clarity. And then it was just off to the races. And that was, April 2004.
Nice. It's been almost 20 years.
So that's an interesting aspect for me when you talk about the high afterwards. Was the high you were actually looking for all along? Like, it's pretty impressive that you were able to notice it after the class. Like, how did that happen? Because I know a lot of times, at least in my experience, like you go to a yoga class or you do this meditative experience and then it's off to the next thing afterwards. It sounds like you sat with it as opposed to off to the next thing afterwards.
Yeah. I remember I wanted to do more of that practice. It just stuck in me. And so I went to some classes down at the Kundalini studio there in LA. And then that summer, that was April. So then the summer solstice, Kundalini summer solstice event out in New Mexico, they did 3 days of this white tantric. So I was like, I'm going to this. Like, for sure I'm going. So me and my sister and her best friend, we all drove out there to New Mexico and just had this really fun time and did 3 days of this white tantric. And then 3 days, I was like, man, this is absolutely even more incredible, and then just like, it was like 2,000 people doing it at that time.
Yeah.
And then just like the community of it and being out in nature and meditating, it was just next level for me.
That's amazing. Yeah, I love that. We're talking about the difference between the chemical high and the natural high, and that's a fun conversation. And especially in today's times, it didn't used to be accessible. I mean, if you were into drugs, even like 25 years ago, it was hard to get your hands on them. You had to know somebody and make a back alley deal. Like trying to get a hold of substances in general was tougher. And now we've got marijuana is legal. You can go to ayahuasca retreats. Like everything's accessible. It's like almost too easy at this point.
Microdosing yoga classes.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So the difference, obviously you are a poster child for the difference between chemical and natural high. I mean, you got on that bus and stayed on it. Well, let's go down the path of being high versus being grounded, and let's talk about that next. I think that's a fun conversation. Once you do get that high, then what? Then
Yeah.
back to dishes, right? Back to
Proper
reality.
Yeah, I think that I was definitely chasing that high for many years in my practice,
Yeah,
and I mean, it's fun, to get a little bit transcendent, to feel elevated. It's a lot of fun. It feels good. Um, but at some point, I mean, I followed that path of kind of being like a spiritual seeker for many years. Um, and that's just what I wanted.
Mhm.
And I didn't have any kids at the time, and wasn't in committed relationship for many years, so I was just enjoying my seeking basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at some point when we're on our spiritual journey, it's fun to not get grounded for a while. Like it's kind of neat to just always be in that that it's funny because in this community, the conscious events community, the spiritual community, I had a term for people who were like that, and this is an affectionate term. I called them balloon people, because they were just like, woo, and they just be, you could like pull their string. They're like, hey, how you doing? They're like, oh, hey. But they were just so happy, like a little balloon floating through their life.
Yeah.
And
I
I
like to
think
call them
that's
sugar cookies.
sugar cookies. Yeah. I think there's a place for it. And when you can get to that at any point with with your practices, so I wanted to talk about that too. The difference between Kundalini yoga and what sets that apart, like what makes yoga Kundalini yoga. So I think there's enough people who don't really know that. I mean, I know a little bit, but I'd like to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, so Kundalini, it's also known as, like, it's been called the mother of all yogas because it uses aspects and techniques from all of the different yogic practices. So whatever, there's like 20 something regional, like, foundational schools of yoga, from the different types of meditation and visualization and practices of sound current and mantra, um, and the asanas. So you have all these foundational modalities within the yogic system overall. And Kundalini yoga, the idea of Kundalini is that, okay, we understand that there's this potential within us. We understand that part of that is an energetic flow.
Mhm.
Everything is energy, right? So that expression of our potential self, that's kind of what the Kundalini is, right? And if we can move this energy, this Shakti power, this Kundalini through us, then we can fully express ourselves. And somewhere along the way, the yogis, the different schools of yoga diverged, and
Right.
some went more into, like disconnecting from the social life, the householder life. Some, went into a lot of renunciation of celibacy and don't take any ginger, don't take any garlic, like stimulating things.
Mhm.
And then you had different practices like the tantric practices that said, hey, it exists, it's all God, use it all, you
Mhm.
know? So Kundalini is from that lineage of like the tantric yogas, where it's let's use everything at our disposal to move the energy through us, and then take that Shakti power and then use that as our kind of direction of merger with
Nice.
personality. So the Kundalini yoga is just like, okay, we've got mudras, let's use them. We've got pranayama, let's use them. We've got the eye focus, the bandhas, postures, movement, put it all together, figure out how to stimulate the body in particular ways to produce specific results. So we have the practice of Kriya, right?
Mhm.
Kriya yoga, specific practices that give us, measured results. And that's Kundalini. And then it's like, how do we use that both for physical body, physical wellness, but also energetics, chakras, aura, arc line energy here. And that's Kundalini.
It's almost like a grounding practice in itself, because it is so embodied. You're using your body's energy and, connecting to that. And, people may have heard the term Kundalini awakening as a thing that happens. Talk about that for a second, because I think that that's one of those terms, and I've heard people talk about it in different ways, different understandings. What's your take on that?
Yeah, over the years, I've heard so many things about Kundalini awakening. I think very often, spontaneous Kundalini awakenings, sure, they can absolutely happen. But there's also like a reason why it's elusive and why it's taken so much practice and study and dedication of countless people over countless years to figure out how to move the Kundalini. It's not just that it's always just like, oh, another Kundalini awakening happening all the time. Does it happen? Sure. But I think a lot of times when people are ascribing this Kundalini awakening to, it's more of like an energetic imbalance where the energy is trying to move, but for whatever reason, there's some block, psychological, physical, chemical, whatever it is. So I think a lot of times it's that's maybe something's opening up in the body and, oh, look, energy moving, Kundalini awakening. So
yeah, I think there's misconceptions on it for sure.
I think there's a lot of misconceptions. And, but yeah, the whole goal of the yogic practices and the others, the Taoists and everyone, was to unlock the potential of the human. And that's the Kundalini, and that's what Kundalini is for,
Fantastic.
One of the things that I like that you're sharing right now that relates almost to the chemical versus natural high is, I remember for a chemical high, it's like you're always chasing that first hit, that first high. And the natural high, when you're doing practices like Kundalini yoga, meditation, it's like the high continues to expand, which is why you can almost get caught in that balloon effect, because you're chasing the high. And then it's like, there's more. You thought that was high, there's more. Oh, you thought that was high, there's more, there's more, there's more. I just want to keep getting higher. Where with the chemical imbalance, it's like, man, if only I could get that first hit again. Like that's literally why you get the shakes. It's because you're like, I still remember that first time. I just want to get it back. Where with the meditation and yoga, it's like, ooh, I thought I had experienced the peak, but there's more. So it kind of goes with like what you're saying about the Kundalini awakening and the distortion of it, because it's like you get this high that you've never had before, and it's like, this must be it. And then you go back and it's like, oh, that wasn't even close to it.
Yeah, that's a great point, Thaddeus. Yeah, chasing that first hit high. And then with our yoga meditation practices, it's like, it's not the sky is the limit, it's infinity is the limit. Right? That's legit what yoga is. Like infinity is the limit. You know what I mean? It's the base and it's the limit. Always a bigger realm to expand into, to transcend into, to merge into. Yeah.
And then that's to Andrea's point of like, how do you come back? Because it's like, I'm gone in infinity. Come back to Earth, come back to this 3D realm. I don't want to.
It's so dense. It's so,
It's so heavy, it's dense, it's boring. And like a lot of times, when we get onto our paths of transformation, whatever form they're taking, it can be like those old relationships that, they're patterned, right? Our relationships are patterned, especially if they're older. Then the people see us as they saw us, and a lot of times they want us to see us in that way. So it feel very limiting as we start transforming, and maybe other people aren't on that path of transformation. It can feel very limiting, and it's like, oh, I don't want that stuff anymore. I'm growing so much. Like I want to keep evolving and growing, and like it can be easy to drop the old relationships. And I definitely went through that process where I wanted space from family, from friends, and then after a while, like coming back to that grounding place, like reconnecting with those relationships, but as a very different person.
Yeah, definitely.
The social aspect of it, the relationship aspect of it can definitely take some navigating. And I think relating back to sobriety, when I got sober, like none of my friends got sober with me. You know what I
Right.
mean? I
Yeah.
was on the path of I need to survive here. I need to heal and survive, and I need to transform. But all of those relationships did not go with me.
Mhm.
Most of them, maybe like 2, 3 people, you know? So it was interesting parallels of like this process of transformation and how certain things come with us and certain things don't come with us, or how it circles back around after months or years or even decades now.
Absolutely. It's interesting with that topic when you're on that path and you don't want to lose those people because you care about them, but you have to let them go. And if they're going to be with you, they do have to level up to meet you at your next level. And that detachment and reconnection thing can be fantastic, but sometimes it is like you just have to let them go. And sometimes that is family. I think that's a conversation that a lot of people are struggling with now with their own conscious evolution. Like they want to become bigger and brighter, but they hold themselves back for their current situation or their family or their friends. And the best gift we can give all those people is the inspiration of setting that example of stepping into something else and becoming who we are designed to be. And I'm getting goosebumps. I love that. Who we're here to be. And then we connect, like just being here with you guys, like I love doing this. And I've been wanting to do these videos with this group now for probably the last 2 years. And it's so fun to actually do them and to be in this space and just like, I don't care what anybody thinks about me, and whatever we talk about is all good and we have a good time doing it. And my only hope is that people watching it are inspired. Like, wow, how can I get some of that? How can I get sugar cookies and Kundalini joy? And how can I get that? So you're in the Phoenix Valley and you practice what are your offerings? Where do you show up and how are you interacting with the community?
So let's see. So right now, the regular class that I teach on a rotating Sunday schedule
Okay,
over. We call we're launching it as Kundalini Phoenix
cool.
over in the Coronado, and we're building out the schedule now. It used to be Yoga Phoenix, and that kind of closed with COVID and that whole reboot of COVID and yoga studios. And I teach some classes via Healing House. So my day job is an acupuncturist.
Okay,
Um,
nice.
I'm over at Healing House in Scottsdale, and we run some Kundalini series through Healing House.
Okay.
Some of that stuff is online. And then coming up this September, we actually have the first Kundalini Yoga teacher training since COVID over at Kundalini Phoenix.
Nice. Cool. We'll put links to all your stuff in the show notes for this and make sure people can find you. And, there's a lot of stuff going on in this valley, and our whole goal of doing this is just to help people find it and understand it better. So something I think maybe people would ask, and this is something I probably would have asked 10 years ago. So you see a Kundalini yoga, you always have your head covered. So talk about that as why that is. And if someone's coming to a class, like you said, I had to put a t-shirt on my head, like how does someone show up for a Kundalini class with respect to the practice?
You can just show up, and I think the main thing about going to like a first Kundalini class is just having an open mind.
Nice.
Because my experience is that when you say yoga, people think vinyasa, people think hatha, right? You're going to do warrior 1, warrior 2, down dog, up dog, work through a sun salutation. Like that's what people think of as yoga. Kundalini is very out of the box if that's your concept of yoga. Just like how, if you're going to do some meditation where you're going, when you think meditation, people don't think that. They think mindfulness, sit there, let your mind calm down, let the thoughts calm down. Hopefully you're going to get to a silent mind, right? That's my experience when I say meditation to people. That's my experience when I say yoga. So Kundalini is very out of the box. Have an open mind. We're going to do some chanting. So that's part of the practice from square one. So be okay with, chanting
Sound.
that aren't in English. They're not in English.
This is
So,
America, though.
so I think that can be a big thing for some people. But I mean, if you want to open the heart, what's more powerful than some mantra work?
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's helpful too, because I think there can be an intimidation to it. Like, wow, those people seem to have it. They're doing something really powerful. I don't know how to show up in that. I'm not there yet. That feeling of like, I don't want to do it wrong, and to me, like, I like embodiment practices. I like feeling energy. I like breath work. I like sound. I like, all that stuff. So it's a lot more aligned for me as a yoga practice, because yeah, the regular stuff just makes my body angry at me. So I like the movement and sound. So I think that helps. The approachability of it is like, you don't have to do anything specific. I actually have gone to several Kundalini classes. It's been a while. But I was kind of like that. Like, well, what do I need to know? Like, just show up and be open. I'm like, well, I'm good at that. Like, okay. But
Well,
I do, like, you don't want to offend the practice or the people. So, there's this, but then you show up and everybody's all warm and welcoming and loving, like, oh, it's fine. Like, it's okay. But I
yeah,
think it might be a little,
oh, sorry.
I think there might just be a little bit of that apprehension for people that are first looking at it, and just not sure how to approach it. So that's really helpful. Like, just show up, be willing to make some sound and feel good and express yourself and be safe doing it.
Yeah, I've heard that before, where it's like, do I have to wear all white? Do I have to get this sheepskin yoga mat? Like, what do I have to cover my head? It just show up, have an experience. That's the main thing about Kundalini.
Love it.
The head covering situation, I mean, I think it predates Kundalini yoga, the modern practice of Kundalini. If we look at basically every single religion, which at some point was a spiritual practice before it was a religion,
Nice.
you've got people covering their heads, wearing, if we look at the Tibetan Buddhists, right, they've got giant helmets that they wear, right?
Yeah.
So adorned for, and what are we getting adorned for? It's to support the experience, whether it's for the sacredness and the devotion, or to contain an energetic field, an energetic flow, where it's still some type of technology, right? Whether we're getting dressed up all in white or in a maroon, robe, like, there's some technology that was cultivated over time, because these practices are thousands of years old.
Mm-hmm.
Covering our heads, I mean, if we look at Judaism, right?
Yeah.
There's covering of the crown chakra there.
Yep.
If we look at even Christianity, if we look at some of the paintings, the angels and the saints and Jesus, they had the golden arc line all around their head. It's like, where did this come from?
Yeah.
So this stuff is very old, very ancient technology, that got lost in time. So even the three wise men, right? They had their heads covered. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Christianity. So there's a rich, deep history of us covering our heads, and I think the main thing that my approach is, what's your experience? If
Yeah.
covering the head is going to help you feel maybe grounded, that might be a big part of the Kundalini thing, because we're moving so much energy. Like, okay, we need to contain this sucker a little bit, right? To support the grounding, which we were talking about before. It's like, it's so easy to go high. Sometimes we need that extra support to stay grounded, because like, we can do all the spiritual work, but if we're aloof and not connected, like, what benefit is that driving actually here on earth?
Yeah. I think, yeah. And, I know a lot of bits and pieces of all of this stuff. So asking you, like, you're filling in pieces for me and everybody listening, but it's really interesting for me when I think about it, that it's probably the most embodied yoga practice because of that. You're using that energy in your physical experience and really, being embodied with it, so as much as you are high, it is. I love that explanation. Like, it kind of grounds it in, like, keeps it here, and we have to be human. So it's a really good way to understand it.
one another point of just that you're mentioning this, like being human, being embodied, and that's really Kundalini has gone through some big transformations in the last couple of years since COVID that many people may be aware of. I don't want to get into the muck of it, but I think the essence of it was that this experience, the big energetic experience that you can have with Kundalini,
Yeah.
was kind of a bit blinding to
Yeah.
also doing the other side of that bright light work, which is the shadow work. And hey, we've got this stuff that might be lurking in our unconscious, subconscious, that has to be tended to just as much as the expansion. We've got to go inside and use that strength and clarity to heal what might be lurking in there. Otherwise, that old stuff just festers. No matter how bright that light is, we have to clean up the inside too.
Right. That's the duality, right? So I think that, yeah, what I'm hearing you say there is it expands that experience really high so you can go and do that shadow work. And that's been my experience. The higher I get, the more I can go dig into that deep stuff and dig it out. And, like a lot of people that don't do this work, they kind of live in this limited space. So they're not going high or low. They're just kind of staying in that middle ground, where when you start doing these spiritual practices, you're going to get called out on your shit, basically. If you're going to go high, it's going to go like, hello. So I love that. I feel like that's exactly the difference that I was hoping you'd explain, that difference, like the practice of that huge difference in the light and dark and the duality of being human and being grounded. That's fantastic stuff.
Yeah, I think it's like it, as we cultivate our energy, like that, whatever polarity, like the polarity just exists in this universe, right? As we have more energy, that polarity gets stronger and stronger. So we have to do that work of like merging the polarity. One that's just kind of like the universal balance, right? Yeah. But at the same time, for us just to be more integrated as a full holistic human.
Right. And we can talk about it. It's okay. Because we've been talking about David Data's The Way of the Superior Man. And have you read this? Familiar?
I've heard of it.
Oh, you've heard of it.
I'm holding it stupid, sorry. It's basically about the polarity, the masculine and feminine design, and that whole thing. So we talk about, the sexual energy, how it's supposed to work, how it's supposed to create, how it's supposed to attract. And when we are in our power and polarity, those magnetics create, that's creation, sexual energy, life force, like it's all the same thing. So,
that's when it expands.
That's the expansion, the connection.
It gets bigger.
Yeah.
I've been waiting to say that for a couple.
You've been waiting to drop that, haven't you? Thaddeus is a mischievous one. We have fun though. But yeah, I think it's something that people don't want to talk about, but it's real and it's our life force. It's how we got here. And if you can find spiritual practices that embody you and make you healthier and more balanced as a sexual being, that's what we are. It's beautiful and it's magic, and it's something that people want, but they don't know how to get to. So I think a lot of the practices and the spiritual practices take you away from that, where you don't know how to embody and then create that magnetic. So yeah, this has been our book. This book has been the topic of our last few conversations, and it's really fun to talk about just what's real, and what people don't want to say out loud. Like we just say it.
And I think for me, going back to like the chemical versus natural, like I also think that's one of the impactful influences that the natural high gets, is you're actually more in control of that energy and expansion. And the more you practice, the more you can control it. And like Dita says in the book, now you can move that sexual energy towards your purpose rather than just pleasure. And part of the natural practice is that I imagine for both of your guys' experiences, like the sexual pleasure in comparison to the natural high is so much lower than getting getting high with breath work, or are the movement embodying all those practices? But at the same time, when you do use that sexual energy for your purpose, it grows and expands your purpose rather than just spilling your seed on the floor, which is what all the spiritual teachings talk about, but it gets misinterpreted as like, oh, you're just supposed to be celibate. And then that's when you start getting into like these dark energies of the energy has to go somewhere. And if you're not putting it towards your purpose and you're just kind of sitting with it, it's going somewhere. At least in my experience, it's not just going to sit there, but when you move it towards your purpose, then it's like, oh, okay, now I can feed that with this energy, and this expansion has a reason for being, as opposed to just pleasure, at least in my experience.
Yeah, it's very cool for me because I've experienced and explored a lot of different modalities and tantra, and all of the energetics of it became like so much more and so much bigger. Like it puts you in a space where just a physical connection doesn't cut it. And, you know, this is our design, is to expand into this connection together and, you know, and build with it. So I feel like it's just a powerful thing that people kind of know about it, but they don't really get it entirely, that your life force, your energy, your health, your physical balance, your masculine and feminine energy within yourself, how you use that, like that is the answer. Like that is the point. That is source flowing through you, you know, like that is it. That's why we're so dang happy.
The sensuality, I mean, I think very often, like there's everything is related, you know what I mean? So it's like, okay, we have sensuality and we have sexuality, and they're very closely related, but also they're not the same thing.
Right.
You know? Yeah. Like with our senses, those are our tools to navigate our existence. Our senses, whether it's up to the 5 senses or also the 6th sense. And a lot of what we do with our yogic practices is we're cultivating our sensitive awareness. You know? So no matter what we're doing, it becomes more sensual because we're more sensitive.
Yeah.
And we're more aware. And if we're not clogging ourselves up with a bunch of drugs, whatever they are, like
Right.
we're going to be more clear, you know?
Yeah.
And that concept of sensual, especially maybe it's just like also here in the US where we're so hypersexualized,
Right.
you know, this massive puritanical foundation of sexuality and sin and just this garbage, you know, that's so distracting. That we can be sensual without being sexual. You know, you just say sensual and everyone goes sex, you know,
Right.
like it goes sex, you know? And what's wrong with sexuality anyway? You know, I think it's kind of great. I grew up in Los Angeles and then I moved to the Bay Area, and I was like, we were just a pretty conventional family, you know? And then when I moved to the Bay Area, the concept was just very different around sexuality and the different forms of relationships. And then also just like going to hot springs.
Right.
Like people running around naked. At first I was like, man, this is really weird. Like I don't feel comfortable being naked. Like give me my swim trunks, you know?
But then you feel weird with clothes on.
Yeah.
Okay, this like, no, this is actually more normal. Like just to be naked in the wilderness, you know, like how normal is that?
Yeah, it's pretty wonderful.
That's more normal than wearing a bunch of clothes all the time. So there's just like, you know, different experiences and this whole idea of like our hypersexualization of society is hopefully that'll get resolved, because I think it'll calm everybody down a lot. We won't be so stressed out.
Yeah, you would think. I think that's it's interesting with the comfort of being naked and, you know, the guilt and shame around that. Like it's such a thing. Like it's such a minority of the population that can be comfortable naked. It's vulnerable, you know, it's not something that they're used to. But it's so unhealthy. I mean, I'm looking at the stuff that like you go into any sort of app at all, and it's just like so much of it. and it's just bombarding us, and it's like, it just feels so gross. Like, what are you trying to just desensitize us at this point? And the answer to me is to become more sensual and to become more in tune with yourself and nature, and, get away from that distraction of that hyper, Tinder, the Tinder culture.
I think
Like,
it's hard. I think at this point it's kind of hard to get away from, and the social norms are
yeah,
implanted. And even, like I relate with the Sikh religion, and that's a big part of my community. And, that's very conservative for the most part, in terms of, these topics that we're talking about.
right,
And I think it's good to like just we respecting where people are at and the culture,
right.
and also just being okay to be free in your own expression is, I mean, that's liberation, right? And that's
Yeah.
what all these practices are for.
I think that's the key, and that's probably the thing we close on, is we're all where we are, and loving and respecting the whole process and watching people go through it. And all we can do, and the best thing we can do, is become more free and set that example and make people go, how do you get that? How do you get that? I want that. And inspire it. We're getting bombarded at such a high level that all we can do is be brighter than that. And it's really, really big, but we just have to keep being bigger.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting because like I've never done white tantra, but if I'm correct, a large part of it is eye gazing, right? Is eye gazing plays a huge role in it, where that's something like we live in a society where more people have more sexual partners than they have people they've looked in the eye for more than a minute.
Yeah.
And that seems almost insane in the sense that not only have they had more sexual partners, but getting someone to look you in the eyes is more challenging than having sex with someone. Like it's mind-boggling for me how many people I've been like, can we just look each other in the eyes for 5 minutes? And they're like, oh, whoa, what are you talking about? Meanwhile, if I pulled my pants down, they'd be like, oh yeah, let's do it. All in. It's like a crazy contrast that sexuality, which is more intimate, more vulnerable than looking someone in the eyes, which I guess is vulnerable too, but it's a different type of vulnerability, is more scary for a lot of people. And it's like social conditioning has us this way. And then we're thirsty for, really everyone's thirsty, in my opinion, for the intimate connection. And we've been conditioned that the sexuality is the intimate connection, where it's more the sensuality is the connection. And that's the missing piece. So you're going on Tinder looking for sensuality, disappointed that you're getting sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like that's a great thought, Thaddeus, that it's like we're looking for some amount of fulfillment, right? And we've been so taught that we've been so conditioned that sexuality is the way to our relationship, right? And ultimately those relationships just teach us more about ourselves. So it's helping me with my relationships, help me with my self-connection. Hopefully, ultimately, we come to that realization, right? That whatever my relationship is just expanding my own self-awareness. But we've been taught so much sexuality is the way to get that fulfillment, whereas the sensual connection and that engagement, they say eyes are windows of the soul, right? And that depth of connection, like whether it's soul connection through the eyes or heart connection, or the combination of that heart energy that opens up as we're connecting through these little spiritual portals of the eyes, like that's the depth of connection, the intimacy that happens there. And ultimately it's me feeling myself, right?
Yes.
I think that might be the like shocking part for people, is that connection, it's ultimately me unlocking my own flow.
Yes.
Right? And I think that's like, maybe that's where the sexuality feels more safe, because we know it. Whereas that self connection, soul connection of me within myself is more unknown and maybe more scary. right? Because then I'm like tapping into my totality, you know,
Yeah.
like I'm touching the totality, which is like, you know, riding that big wave.
Yeah.
Incredibly, it's, you know, overwhelming.
Yeah. Like I'm having an orgasm right now just with you sharing this. I'm like, oh man, should I talk or should
Yeah,
I?
me too.
Like, oh, and I know Andrea is, because she's connected to energy. So like people that are watching that can see energy probably are like, oh my God, there's this big sensual orgy going on right now. And there's a whole population that's not even aware of it. And it's beautiful.
Yeah, just keep it moving. Get the blockages out of the way and keep it moving.
Yeah.
Oh, but that's what all the practices are about, right? Like chanting and spinning and bowing and moving and breathing, just to get the like spirit alive and awake and moving and orgasming, basically, right?
Yeah.
It's magic. It's beautiful.
It is.
Well, thank you for joining us today. I'll get your all the information so we can share it, and yeah, anybody watching this, pay attention, because there's events and they're conscious and they're fun. So now you know who you're hanging out with a little more. I'm gonna make my way to one of your classes or something. So I just started kind of being more social and showing up again. So look forward to spending time with you.
I just my first hot yoga class in a long time last week. Ooh, and I forgot my water bottle. It was being in community, you know, it's the best. So thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, well, thank you, and see you later to everybody. I'm gonna end the recording. Thank you.
Bye-bye.